Hello and welcome to day 126 as we read through the Bible together. We will be looking at 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12 today, Psalm 51 and Matthew 23. Before we get going, I want to say up front, this is a really hard passage and it might be triggering for some people, especially people who've had intimate relationship trauma in their lives. So please take that into consideration as you are preparing to listen to this or read these passages. So we talked about in a previous reading about how it was the time of year when kings went to war. And this reading starts with that again. It is spring fighting season. And once again, we see that David does not go out with his army. He stays behind in his palace in Jerusalem. Now, this causes big problems in this story because we hear how David is wandering around his palace looking out over his city, and his palace is up higher than everything else in the city. The houses have pretty private areas. There's very small windows. You really can't see into each house from the street. However, every house is open to the sky with an open courtyard to let in air, to let in sunlight, to let in water. That is collected in cisterns. And so from the palace, David is able to see into the homes of the people of his kingdom. And as he's doing this, he sees a woman bathing, and David thinks she's looking pretty good. And so the first thing, this is a woman named Bathsheba. And the first thing I want us to all remember is that she is not being indecent. She is within the privacy of her home. She is doing the normal bathing that all of the people do in the privacy of their homes. And so this is not anything on her part that is unusual or seen to be sketchy or dodgy as a type of behavior. David sends for her, sleeps with her, and gets her pregnant. Now, this causes David some trouble because her husband is one of his military leaders. He's off at war. So if he comes back and finds his wife pregnant, there are going to be questions. So he sends for Uriah to come and report to him and says, "Why don't you go home, spend an evening with your wife?" Uriah, though, is a man of integrity. And when his soldiers are in the field and they are not with their loved ones, he does not go and spend time with his wife. He stays with the servants in the castle, in the palace. So David tries a couple other ways of getting Uriah to go home, and he doesn't do that. So then David calls for someone else to come and gives them instructions to have a really high risk battle. And in the course of that battle, Uriah is killed. And so this is the way that David covers up the affair that he has had with Uriah's um, wife, Bathsheba. And after the mourning period for Uriah's death, then David marries Bathsheba. Now, David has screwed up. He has not shown compassion, especially to one of his military leaders. God is unhappy with him. God sends the prophet Nathan to go talk to David. Nathan uses a story to try and get David to understand what is going on here. David does quickly understand what is happening, and David shows a tremendous amount of remorse. Now, there are consequences to what David has done. His first son with Bathsheba will die shortly after birth. They will have a second son. His name is Solomon, and he will eventually become the king and follow in succession after David. Now, David, to wrap up this reading, goes to finalize the capture of the Ammonites, which draws this whole section of the story to an end. Now, Psalm 51, our next reading, is tied to all of this. Psalm 51 is considered to have been written by David because of this situation. Psalm 51 is his cry of remorse, his prayer of confession to God. It is often used in many Christian traditions as a prayer of confession and remorse in Christian worship experiences. This is a great one to bookmark for the times when we need to show remorse and to pray, confessing our sins and asking for forgiveness from God. So that's how Psalm 51 is tied into this specific reading about Bathsheba in 2 Samuel. As we turn to Matthew 24, Jesus really lays into the Jewish religious leaders and political leaders in this reading. It's about the Pharisees, it's about the Jewish people who are in charge. It's not about all Jewish people, it's about the particular people who have authority and who are teaching in Judea under the Roman Empire. He is accusing them of following the teachings of Moses, but not living into the spirit of God's plan in their personal lives. And Jesus challenges them by asking, do we live by God, or do we just talk about God's plan for humanity? Are we walking the talk, or are we just talking hot air? So Jesus points out there is one authority, and that is God, that all people are peers to each other, and we should not be setting some people up into a major hierarchy, that Jesus is willing to interact directly with everyone. And Jesus calls each of us to be a servant, and that leaders should be servants first. Jesus calls us to not be arrogant. For example, he calls out the leaders who tithe precisely, but they skip living lives of compassion and kindness to their neighbors. They skip sharing resources when they have more than they need with those who do not have enough. So overall, this entire chapter is quite a major tirade that Jesus is using against the Jewish leaders. And the bottom line of all of this is that Jesus wants us to live by Jesus' example, to not be arrogant, to be compassionate, to show mercy, to seek justice, to live in the daily decisions we make the way of God, the goals that God sets forth, both in the rules of Moses in the Old Testament, but also how Jesus fulfills that through the choices he made during his life of ministry. So overall, the combination of all of these readings today is pretty harsh, and it can be hard to get through, but it's something I want us to remember that, again, with Bathsheba, Bathsheba was not the person at fault here. It was David entirely who was at fault. And we need to hold on to that as we read through that and interpret that. But we also need to respect the fact that when David was called out on this, he lived up to what he did, and he confessed his sins to God and sought forgiveness. And so I think that's something that we need to do. And that's fits in with Jesus' teaching that when we screw up, we need to seek forgiveness, and that we need to be living every day according to the heart of God. We will see you next time.